So it's week 12 and we're just kind of getting set up with our lesson 12 folder. We've copied the lesson 11 repository, run npm install both in the root and in the client to install our 80 megs worth of npm packages. And then I've used nodemon in my root to get my server running. This is where we left off last week. And I'm going to open up my code editor. We can kind of review how we structured this. So fire up your editor once your lesson 12's all copied.
It says taping install fails on your system.
Is install fails on your system?
Yeah.
There's the .ida, is that, we just delete that?
Yeah, you don't need that. Sorry, read me the exact here. Typings install fails.
So it just says tell the author that this fails on your system. Typings install.
Now we did install typings. Okay, well, we could try this fix. Install dt-gapi.auth2 -- global. Command does it. This one right here in white.
npm install again. Try and see if there's errors.
Yeah, try the npm install again. Okay, if typings is not recognized, then
That just goes under lesson 12.
no, it's inside the client folder.
Oh, that's what it means.
Yeah. Now we did this last week, but you can try it again. Do a global install of typings, which is your TypeScript compiler. So the command right here in the quick start. Because we will need typings to work, otherwise your TypeScript doesn't get compiled to JavaScript.
That fixed it.
That command fixed it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So sorry, the next choice is npm install.
Yeah, reinstall typings globally.
Well, and then under lesson 12 we're still.
Doesn't matter because it's global, so it doesn't matter where you are in that case.
Yeah. But then after you just see if the errors on just npm install.
Yeah, if you can install typings, then go back to your client folder and try npm install again. So if we look at how we set this up last week, we kind of took our Express generator to start, but then we made some changes. We created a server folder. We put our game model here. And we also renamed the routes folder to controllers, which is something I probably should have done right from the very first lesson we created the Express generator. Controllers is a much better name. It's more descriptive than routes. To me, routes is about dispatching URLs to a certain place. So I don't like the name routes. I like controllers better. In our app.js, we created an API controller, and we also changed the default location of our views. We got rid of the views folder that the Express generator builds with our EJS templates because we're not using EJS. The public folder into our client and app. So all of our public assets are now inside of client. They don't live on the server end. So basically, our server contains our Node and Express code, and our client contains our HTML and Angular code, is how we structured this. So we created an API that uses our game model to get the data, but rather than loading a view, it just sends JSON back. So at localhost 3000/API, this is what we get. We get all the game data, and we installed, I installed the JSON viewer plug into my browser, which some of you installed last week, so the text doesn't just appear as one block. It's actually formatted as JSON, so it's easier to read. Is anybody else having a problem getting this running? Still installing your NPM? Okay. So our first task here is we're going to want to put a simple form on that has inputs that match, an input for title, developer, genre, year. And we want the ability to add a new game. So when the user fills out that form, there's going to be an add button. And as soon as they click the add button, the game should immediately appear here, and the form should get cleared out. The page will not need to reload because Angular will handle all of this. So let's start in our game.html by putting a simple form on here. So where would we find our game HTML page? Remember, it's not EJS. We're not using EJS anymore. So where do our HTML files live? Yeah, inside of client, app, and views. We've got index, which is our main template. It includes our header and footer. And then we've got our game partial, which we're embedding. So let's add maybe a section here. Now, because Angular is going to deal with our form posts, we don't actually even need a form HTML form tag. Not even necessary, because we're not actually posting this stuff to the server. We're simply posting it to the Angular library. And then Angular will make the request to the server. So we can just put on some field sets here. Let's just see how this looks. We'll have a title label and a title text box that's going to be required. Can't add a new game with no title. So we'll add that required attribute. So we want to validate both on the front end as well as on the back end in our model. Okay. So we'll add 3 more field sets. If you want to just copy them, you could, but make sure you change all the names. So now we've got developer, and then we've got genre and year inputs as well. Year should be type equals number. Probably min equals, I don't know. What's the oldest video game alive? Yeah, when would Pong be? 77? All right. Okay, we'll just see how that looks. Oh, I didn't add my class form group to the field set. Gives us a little padding. Okay. And now we just need an add button underneath. I don't want the button to say save. We're going to wind up having two buttons under our form, both an add and an update button. The way edit is going to work, when we click edit here, we're just going to fill the form right here. Again, we won't need a reload to do it. And when we click edit, we'll hide our add button and we'll show our update button. The rest of the time, our add button will be visible, our update will be invisible, and Angular gives us some simple tags for showing and hiding. Now, a student this morning said, well, do we really need this form for editing? Couldn't we just click edit and have text boxes? We could render text boxes right here inside the row of our table. We could do that. I've done it before in applications. I find from a user interface perspective, it works really badly. Why would turning these into text boxes when I click here, what would be some of the usability issues we might have there? Like, why don't we just write those text boxes right into the selected row of our table? It's functional, but I would recommend not a good idea. How come?
Kind of defeats purpose, no? Of like, it's like an MVC, you kind of organize yourself. You're just gonna throw the inputs right in there.
Could be. What I've found, well, there's a few problems when you just render input controls here. The first one is all it takes is one record with one long string, and suddenly you click edit and the page becomes massively wide, and a user has to scroll across it to actually see all of it. The other thing that tends to happen is if you want to put any kind of validation messages, because they click edit, but then they violate your validation rules, there's really no good place to display validation rules regarding the form when you put the form in line table. So it works, but it winds up looking terrible and being hard to use. So I don't recommend it. I think it's better to have a separate form for editing. Would be my recommendation. So let's put on an add button here. We'll offset it by one column. It'll just say add. Now, normally with a form, that button just triggers a form submission. It'll do a get or post and go to whatever action we specify in the form. If we're just, this is a run-of-the-mill HTML form, but it's not run-of-the-mill because we actually want this data to be handled by Angular instead. So we don't even need the form. What we're going to do is we're going to add, just like here we have a couple of Angular directives, we're going to add an Angular directive onto our button. So when the button is clicked, we're going to call a method in our game component. So in effect, Angular is kind of hijacking the form submission. So here, if we add in round brackets click equals, now we can call a function in our component. So we're going to call a method called addGame. So clicking this button will invoke this method in our Angular game component. This also means we don't have to worry about any kind of form action. We're not going anywhere. The page won't even reload. It simply submits the data here. So we're going to wind up like we did last week when we were getting the list of games. We basically wrote 3 different get methods. So our form looked for an array called games, which we defined in our component. So when we created our game component, we immediately called get, which went to our service and called get. Service. And our game service ran a get request on our Express, our server controller. /API, which ran this method, get, which got the games and returned them as JSON. So we basically had 3 different get methods, one in the Express controller, one in the Angular service, one in the Angular component. We need to do the same thing now for adding. So our button click is going to look for a method in our component called addGame. So we're going to need to write an addGame function. This will call an addGame function in our service, which will call what kind of method in our API. We want to send new data in. It's not going to be get. Yeah, we're going to send in call a post request, which we'll write in our API. Which will take that JSON in, save it to the database, and send a JSON response back. So inside of our app, client app and components, we want to open up our game component if you don't have yours open already. And let's write our add method. So we'll create a new game instance. Now, one thing we need to do here, right now our game component has one property, which is a list. Much like our Mongoose model, we need to now, if we want to save a new one, we need to define the individual properties of a game in here. So we're going to have an ID property. Now the IDs in Mongoose, it's a combination of letters and numbers. So we're going to have to set this up as a string rather than as a number. We've got a string. Oops. We have a developer. So this kind of matches our game model that we wrote with Mongoose. And we have genre and year. So year is a number. So a game has all of these properties, the individual values as well as a list. So what we want to do before we call our service is we need to fill each of these properties from our form. We don't need an ID, but we'll say title equals whoops, sorry, these should be colons. Because this is JSON. Sorry about that. We're creating a new JSON object, and we're going to take in the values from our form here. Now, before we go anywhere, right now, these values are going to be blank. We need to connect the 4 input values to these properties like this. We did it a couple weeks ago. How do we bind the input in HTML and HTML input control? How do we connect it to a value in Angular? There's an Angular directive we're going to need to add here. Actually, you can see it in the list. So what attribute should we attach to the title so that Angular can track the value? Sorry? Nope, not ng4. That's for a loop. Good guess. Yeah, it's the ng model title. So whatever value we have for title is going to display in that box, and any value we put in that box, Angular holds in the variable called title. So we want to set the ng model property of all 4 of our inputs. So these ng model attributes, that's what connects a particular input to a particular value in our Angular component. They're now connected. Just to show you what this would look like, temporarily, let's say in my get games, you don't have to add this to yours, but if I say this.developer, I'm going to hard code, I'm giving the developer a value of ABC. Oops. Hang on. Okay, obviously done something wrong. I expected my box to say ABC. Oh. They changed the syntax. This is the old syntax. The new one's a bit funky. No, I believe it's square brackets and round brackets. Let's see if I put that around it. Maybe I have my brackets reversed. Let's just see. Obviously, my syntax is not quite right. We're not far off.
Yeah, it's NGA model. They have in their documentation.
Square bracket, round bracket. How did I do it? Yes, okay, so it is. Let's see what's going on. I have broken something. That's interesting. Why is my NG model not allowed here?
It's supposed to be square and round.
Right.
This one has like a hashtag control equals NG model.
Yeah, we shouldn't need to do that. I'm just looking at what I did a couple hours ago. Obviously, I've done something not quite right. Let's see.
Are we supposed to have the ID in the game area?
Well, no, because we're adding. So our ID is going to be empty, right? We have no ID until we save. Maybe I'll finish writing this method and see what happens. See what am I? So we're going to create a new game, and then we'll call add game, and pass in our new game. And see what kind of response we get back. And then we'll add the new game to our array. Complaining here because our service doesn't yet have an add method. See what my console has to say. Thoughts? Can't bind to NG model. Let's clear it and refresh. Huh. That's interesting. So it's not like an NG model. I'm not sure why. Let's compare for a minute with what we see here. That's what we didn't do. So in our component, there are some other references we need to make. Thank you. In our, where is it? It would probably be in app module.ts. Yeah, we're using the HTTP module. We need to include the forms module now. We didn't include it last week because we didn't use it. So inside our Angular HTTP, there's also a forms module. No, it's not in there. Oh, sorry. You need to make another reference. Import. I left this out last week because we didn't use the form. We're going to reference the forms module and import it here. That should fix our problem. So now when I get a game, if I say this.developer equals ABC, it should load ABC in the developer box. Right? So whatever value I give it in the component, it's tied with that ng model tag. So now I need the proper brackets around all my ng model definitions. So round brackets inside of square brackets. Okay, better.
Let's see app.modules.cs.
Sure. So we added line 8 and we added forms module to line 13. So without those references, we can't use the forms, and ng model is part of that forms library. So it's used for dynamically binding any form controls to variable values in Angular. Without that reference, ng model doesn't exist. So we've kind of handled the user interface component. We've written the add method in our component. We've made the proper reference here. We won't need to do this again. And we've tied the 4 input fields in to our component. So now our component's not happy because it's trying to add this new game to our service, but we don't have any definition of that method yet in our service. So we need inside of our game service, we need an add game method that takes a game as a parameter. So we'll open up our service. We're going to write an add function. So we said we're going to call HTTP post on our API. But when we're actually sending data, we also need to set up just an HTTP header to specify that our content type is JSON. So we'll need to do that in our component. Sorry, we're in our service. So in our service, we've made a reference to HTTP. We also need from here now on line 5, we want to import the headers class from Angular's HTTP. So we can set up a header that says the content type of our request is JSON. So we'll add headers to the imports from HTTP. We'll set up a header, specify JSON content type. Our content type is going to be application/JSON. And when we make our post request, we have to send in 2 things. We have to send in the new game object that we want to go to our Express route, our Express controller, and we also need to send in this headers variable so that when Express receives it, it knows it's JSON. Now we'll make an HTTP post request to the same URL. So before we did get, which looked up everything, now we're doing post for creating. So we're doing a post at this URL. We're going to pass in, so notice the post, see the parameters. So the first parameter is what's the URL we're posting to, well, /API. The second parameter is what's the request body. We're just going to pass in this game object that we've populated from the form. And the third parameter, which is optional, are there any options? Well, there are. We're sending in those headers. Actually, whoops, sorry. Before we do the game, we're actually going to convert it from JSON to a string using the JSON stringify method. We pass in the game. And then lastly, we pass in our headers. And we get a response back. Oops. So then we're going to convert our response back to JSON. So our service takes the JSON object in, sets up the content type, converts it to a string, and makes a post to our Express controller. So now we're going to need a post method in our API that will use our Mongoose model, save that new JSON object, and check for an error. So let's write that method. We should be able to get our game to save, and then we'll take a break. And then we'll deal with update and delete a bit later. So we've written 2 of our 3 add functions. First one is in our component. The second one is in our service. And now our service is going to look for a post method in our Express controller. So let's go to our API file. Yep. Sure. And I should probably put in a semicolon here. So the form data gets sent to the component calls the service calls the Express controller, which calls the model, which talks to Mongoose. Sorry, which talks to MongoDB. So our API is fairly simple. We call router.post at our root. Someone asked me this morning if we need next. Not really. Could leave it out if we want. So we can just create a new game. And populate it with our request body. So that will include all the fields. We don't have to map the individual fields because the properties of our Angular component match the properties of our Mongoose model exactly. So you don't have to say title goes here, year goes here, developer goes there. It's smart enough, just matches them based on the names. And then we can just call new game.save. So this will save it to MongoDB. And we can check for an error. We'll send an error code. If it works, we'll send back the new game, and we'll set up a status of 201, which is the HTTP status code for new data has been created successfully. 200 is just a generic OK. 201 is a more specific OK. After saving data, we'll typically use 201. So now we could try to use our form, see if we could add something new to it. If it works, our new game should show up here immediately. So no reload, and our new game is here. Now there is one more thing we should probably do from an interface perspective. What should we do after we add that game? Yeah, we probably should clear the form. So we could just write a simple function that sets these Angular variables to null, and automatically it should clear the form, right? Because our form is always bound with ng model to those values. As soon as we change one of the values, the form will change. In our component, we could write a simple reset method. Maybe call it clear form. We just say, set everything to null. But after we add the new game, let's also now call clear form. Right. This clear form. So add the game, populate the list below, and set all of our properties to null, which will automatically clear the inputs. We'll try one more time, and then I think we'll take a break. Here's our new game at the bottom, and our form is removed, cleared right away. So we're halfway there. Time for us to take a break. When we come back, we'll do delete. Delete will be really simple. And then we'll save, edit, update for the end, because that's kind of a two-part process. We want the user to click the edit button, and then we want to populate this form, hide the add button, show the update button, and then we need to write the code to do an update when the user wants to save those changes. Save those changes to the database, clear the form, and again, repopulate the list.